Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am here with two very special guests who are going to be talking all about direct instruction within special education. I'm here with Randi Saulter and Ann Baum. Randi, let's start with you. How about you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
I'm so happy to be with you. Thank you. I don't want to read you my resume, but I always think it's good that people kind of know who's talking to them and have a lens to look through. Also, it sounds like I can't keep a job, so I try to keep this to a minimum, but it's just that I get bored really fast. So I started out as a speech and language pathologist, which I think is it turned out to be an amazing foundation to build academics on top of, which I didn't realize at the time. Then I went back and got a general ed and a special ed credential, ended up doing speech and language pathology with severely disabled kids in San Francisco Unified for a couple of years, then went into the classroom, which is what I always knew I wanted to do, and taught fourth and fifth grade second language learning boys for the most part, who were language learning delayed in both their primary and English language. Ended up, and we'll let Ann talk to you about how she brought me DI, but ended up using DI in that class, expanding that to a school-wide program in my middle school. There were 1,500 kids in that middle school, and all but 30 of them tested into a level of corrective reading. And that in doing that for a couple of years, we ended up taking our school off the going to be taken over list. That was in Northern California. I ended up becoming the assistant superintendent for special ed in that district, left and became a principal of a couple of different schools, taught at the university, which is fascinating to me. I taught at San Francisco State, Portland State, and the Ohio State University, which, as you can imagine, some of our friends who we don't see eye to eye with have offices down the hall at OSU. So that was interesting. I've worked with Randy Sprick for several years around climate and culture and management, and which I learned so much there. Followed around Anita Archer like a fangirl until she let me do her explicit instruction presentation. So everybody that you guys have shrines to in your house, I too have shrines to them in my house.
Oh, that's great. And gosh, you mentioned Randi and Anita. Both, by the way, Anita just like sent me an email saying she's been sending my book around to people. It's called Just Tell Them for anyone listening. It's online. You can buy it. Let's go over to you, Ann. You have an interesting backstory that people want to hear. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
I've taught for 30 years, special education, always special day class in public schools and non-public schools, mostly public schools. And I took an early retirement when it just seemed like things were not pedagogically aligned with any kind of way to be ethical and effective with kids. I won't mention the districts that I've worked in, but I think it's useful to know that I worked in a variety of districts in the Bay Area. I have a much shorter backstory than Randi, but I can make the claim that, yeah, I told Randi about direct instructions. There's that. I can be happy about that. Randi and I met in college, SF State, we could say that. And I think we would both agree, even though we had different majors, we weren't taught explicitly how to teach. But the good news is that we weren't taught how not to teach, because so many the younger generation were explicitly taught how to confuse kids. The pedagogy in math and in reading has been disastrous. And only now people are starting to wake up to that, which is how I know of you. And I'm so glad to have made that connection. So the reason I know about direct instruction is that we were asked to clean the cellar or the basement or whatever of my non-public school. And by pure luck, we found some dusty boxes of reading mastery. And so I was able to start using DI materials since my second year of teaching, but not through being smart, because my colleagues said, no, we're using this. Read the manuals, we're going to use it. So without training, but with manuals, we're able to make a dramatic difference immediately, like within weeks, with the same kids. So this was a school that had a really high teacher to student ratio. It had a big budget. But after a year of doing all kinds of stupid pet tricks and everything I could think of, my kids were not making significant progress at all. So this literally was such a gift that taught me how to teach reading in the sequence, in the way, in the content. And it's been a game changer. It's been a career maker.
I love it. And both of you can answer some of my questions today around DI and special education because I, like many people, have worked in schools where general education was an absolute disaster. However, maybe one area of the school that might have had their act together at all was the special education department. And I had that experience with special education in middle school, having corrective reading, corrective math, and also connecting math concepts, right? However, even then, right, you had a lot of sort of teacher autonomy questions, things around just very disorganized teaching between classes in the special education department. You can't just buy the materials; you have to use them as intended, right? And so I'm so excited about our discussion. So let's get right into it. First question. We'll start with you, Randy. Could you highlight a key moment in your career where DI had a significant impact on a student, compared to maybe what you had learned in your teaching program and what other people were doing?
Absolutely. I had the best bulletin boards. They were interactive and we made comic books and I had the best projects on the planet. My kids loved coming to class. Nobody knew how to read and I wasn't teaching them. Having been a person, and now that I train and consult around DI, I know that this is a really common story, but picking up DI materials and using them untrained for a while and then becoming trained and going, oh, I get it now. That was really cool for me, but it's even cooler. What was even more interesting for me and more exciting and more motivational for me was when my kids would start to understand what was going on. And in particular, and pardon the language used, I'm just going to quote Mr. Segura. This was my student, Jesus, who looked up one day and said, you know, I'm just going to start remembering this stuff because it always comes and bites you in the butt. And I thought, that's the answer. You understand now that when I teach you something, it's not just for the next 30 seconds and that you're building on pre-skills. And to me, it was such a moment of, you now understand more than 75% of what my colleague teachers understand. And students started to learn how they learn. The motivation was off the charts. And listen, I may have grown up in California, but I'm no tree hugging, let's work on their self-esteem girl. That's not how I roll. But I do know that when you learn something new and someone is pointing it out to you that you didn't know this yesterday and you know it today, that's what builds self-esteem. And then in addition to that, I learned a really interesting concept around motivation. And this was a man named Dr. Fish. And I think I learned about him from Randy Sprick. He said that motivation is the value associated with learning something and that learning. And so it was a multiplication problem that equaled motivation. So if either of the two factors were zero, you weren't going to get anywhere. And to me, that was another moment where I started to see, I don't have, I play the teacher student game. We do the little thing, but for the most part, showing students that they were learning things that they didn't know the day before was how I kept them going and how I kept myself going. And that happened daily. And it's not because I'm magic. It's because I did exactly what someone smart told me to do.
I love that. We won't dive into teacher student game and behavior. I've got to do an episode on how the intersection between behavior and DI because that is for people that don't know about the teacher student game, just imagine for the briefest of seconds that you basically make a T chart and there's a race between the student and the teacher, but mostly it's positive reinforcement with ticks giving lots of student praise around specific behaviors. So I love that story. I'd love to hear if Anne maybe could tell a similar kind of story from her world, kind of illuminate the space, kind of a key moment in your career when DI had a significant impact on a student.
Well, besides the big change after the year 2 of teaching, fast forward 2, 3 years, I got to meet Zig at one of the DI conferences in Monterey, or Carmel. And this is the conference when he banged on his fist on the podium and said, "There are no shortcuts," which is, I still love that. And I say that to myself and all the time. And so that was the conference where I spent $2,000 of my own money on connecting math concepts and took courses from Bernadette Kelly and just went, dang, this is good. And wow, was it good? And so I was able to free up so many hours of planning for kids who are working at kind of the 2nd through 5th grade level in math. At a special day class that was for 2nd through 6th grade, I would say. And these were mostly LD kids, but with the associated behaviors and emotional components that go with that based on failure and guilt that kids have as a result of, and they're the last ones that should feel guilty, of course. So fast forward to maybe a year later when the director of special ed brought a child to me who nobody knew how to work with him, and he had behaviors, and so he just met me, and so he was friendly enough, and so I decided to give him a really easy placement test from connecting math concepts level A. And I thought, okay, we'll just build some momentum. Let's just see how he can do. Later, I noticed in the notes that he had the expressive language of a 4-year-old. So yikes. So I give him the task, and I turned away maybe to wink at the mother or wink at the special ed director or something. I don't know what. And I looked back, and the workbook page was covered with tears. I mean, water, he was just silently crying. He couldn't get it. And what he couldn't get was the solving for, I think it was 1 plus box equals 0, or 0 plus 1 equals box. No idea. And he was crying. And once again, he got to meet failure. So this kind of thing makes me really angry, of course, because, and you got to wonder, like, wow, what do you say when they really don't know what 0 plus 1 is? Because I wasn't teaching at that level. So fortunately, I had the manual and I looked it up, and yeah, there's a thing, how to tell that child how to do 0 plus 1. But think of all the skills, prerequisite skills that he didn't have. One-to-one correspondence, what symbols are, what equations are, how to count accurately. And you got to do those things. And so absent that teaching, this child had all kinds of behaviors and no growth, and was a very jaded 7-year-old. That was profound for me, the tears and just the absolute desperation. And direct instruction worked beautifully with him. Of course, he learned to read, learned to do math. I had him for 3 years, and he made all kinds of progress.
This is serious stuff. Working with kids who have low attendance, who consider themselves failures, consider themselves stupid, who struggle in the general education classroom. I guess the feeling though is that putting the kids in a direct instruction program or teaching them by level could make them feel more like failures, right? They start to recognize that they're being put into different groups and so on. But both of you have touched on something that I've experienced, which is that sure, maybe the first time you're walking to this unknown room with this kid, they're asking questions. What am I doing? Why am I in this group? And so on. But it's the feeling of knowing something and feeling successful that, in my experience, brings the kids back. The low attendance kids comes to your class, right? And sees you as a role model and starts to learn stuff. I guess my story, if I can add one, would be around a girl who said that same thing. Okay, so we're in the, I guess I'm with, those kids, and but then walking back to her general education class, she sees a friend. The friend goes, "What are you doing?" She goes, "Well, do you know what makes a fraction greater than 1?" Right? And the kid goes, I don't know." She goes, "Really? You don't know? We just learned that," right? She was proud of what she knew as a result of really effective teaching. So I guess I kind of want to dive into your classroom, kind of how it looked. Special education classrooms can come in many forms, and a lot of them have many different levels and different needs. Let's bounce around differently. How about Ann? Maybe you could go ahead and describe kind of how did that classroom look and how was it organized?
So I like to describe like sort of a golden era, even before Common Core, if you don't mind, because I think that was a great example of how it could work. So had a group of between 12 and 14 kids. I think we would sneak some kids in too who needed help, and nobody said anything. And then place them correctly in different programs, including reasoning and writing, and connecting math concepts and reading mastery, and connect also corrective reading, decoding, and the wonderful comprehension programs. So everybody's placed in there. So sometimes a group would have 3 kids, sometimes a group would have 8 kids. And the bigger the group, the more likely I would be leading the directions. So we want everybody to be working at their instructional level and to be receiving the direct instruction they needed. And that involves paraprofessional training, and it involves being lucky enough to have committed paraprofessionals. And I usually did. I had wonderful people and the best deal in town, of course, right? So what these programs allowed me to do was to train them and to give them tools where they could feel confident delivering instruction. And that, if they weren't paid more than, I think, what, $1.50 an hour, Randy, something like that. But, but they did take pride in the fact that, yeah, they really did. They were instrumental in teaching kids to read and do math, and they saw it with their own eyes, just like the kids did. So the training, the materials allowed for the training to occur, and allowed for conversations to be efficient with the right data, not like, how did Fred do today? Well, Fred is emerging in his reading, kind of, but Fred got 7 out of 10 right in part D, or something like that. I would also give them logs to record accuracy in sentence reading, and then we would have that data. Great for progress monitoring for IEPs. So it was great to have the data, and it was great to have the confidence knowing that this stuff worked. And then that confidence was transferred not only to the students, but also to the paraprofessionals. So it was good to see that they could be motivated by this too. That's why they're in there. They're not in there for the glamour and the money, that's for sure. They're so underpaid. So if you walk into my class, you'd probably see a buzz, not of kids doing engaged in project solving things where they're teaching each other, but in 1 or 2 or even 3 DI groups going separately. And you might have another group of kids working independently with meaningful independent work that was part of the different programs, whether it was reading mastery or connecting math concepts. And there's even a component that says independent work, right? So that improved behaviors, of course, too. Everybody knew what they were supposed to do. It wasn't a secret. And my favorite aspect of this, one of my favorites, is that it preserved a lot of stamina for me to be, what's the word? That word starts with C. Oh, creative, Randy. I could be very creative in my delivery, in my developing of classroom culture, behavior systems, dice rolls. If you roll a 2, you get a free dice roll, like all this extra stuff that was, but just part and parcel of the whole program. But the infrastructure, the meat, the content, that was done by somebody a lot smarter than I, that had, a good night's sleep, right? So teachers are busy, 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 and tired. And it doesn't matter how smart you are. Nobody can write exquisite curriculum for 4 grade levels for, 3, 4, 5 different subject matters. So my one beef with DI is that they didn't do more history and social studies, because their programs are so great. Like the Doug Carnine social history book is so wonderfully written, but never marketed, I think, in the way it could have been.
Definitely check out the Doug Carnine episode, by the way. He's awesome. Randy, how about you? So Ann's touched upon a few things, IEPs and paras, and also just like the training and the maintenance of these programs. And you are literally an expert in this, in how to implement this, how to get this going, how to bring it back even from the dead, and so on. What is your approach, and how does that work with all these different moving pieces Ann's just described?
So, it's a bit of a massage situation here, kind of coming in and being the salesperson for something. I often start my talks with, I don't own stock in McGraw-Hill. I don't make any money if you buy this. I'm going to sound like I'm trying to sell it to you, but it's just because I'm passionate and I've seen kids' lives change. So you kind of have to go that way. I present a lot of research and help teachers get on board with looking at data. There's something we do in education that I don't know that I've seen in other arenas, and that is that we don't believe our own data. I have all these data for you. I'm not making them up. Come into my room. My kids are outperforming your general ed kids. And why would you not give this a try? Just even if you hate it, just try it. It's something is better than nothing. And then I'll pick it up from there. So sometimes we have that approach. Sometimes I have an approach where teachers have thrown up their hands and said, just give me something because this isn't working, which is also fine. I do an extra amount of rationale because direct instruction has, and I train other programs. I was a co-author on Rocket Math. I've got a lot of other things going on. But when I am training a DI program, I'm heavily involved in the rationale because we're asking teachers to do behaviors with that are akin to learning a new dance step, right? I want you to do something completely different now, and it's weird, or it looks weird for a minute. Signaling kids, getting group unison responses, correction procedures, following a script, not embarking on trips down rabbit holes and really cool, interesting examples of seeing a dead cat from the school bus on the way to. Lots of things we have to talk about and lots of rationale for that. And you can look at teachers and see lights going off when, yes, I've been in that position. Oh my goodness, that's why that happened. And I feel like a lot of upfront research and rationale is super important when you're asking teachers to do something very different. The other, and switching hats for just a minute, I think that often there's a disconnect. Teachers can envision some work like this in an elementary classroom. Sure, you've got some kids in small groups, sure that, but they can't envision what that might look like in a middle school or high school. And that's my area that I like to focus on. I'm a middle school person, and everything that goes along with that is exactly true. They're hormonally challenged. I'm a little weird. It's a love connection. But having what that might look like is adding an intervention period to the end of the day where everybody's getting something at their instructional level. That's hugely new to a middle school model. And teachers understand very quickly the impact that has. You'll start to hear history teachers talking to intervention teachers going, hey, is Chad in your B2 group? Because he asked if he could read today and he's never done that. So those kinds of things happening in a middle school context, or I personally feel that one of the biggest difficulties teachers have is differentiating. The concept is tricky. It sounds like you need to have 18 adults in your class to get it done. There's a lot of extra training around management and expectations and what that needs to look like. And I think that those are the things, the breakthroughs that need to happen at the middle school and high school level that can let us do the work that we need to do and can get away with it so much easier. And I'm not saying your job is easier, but that that look and feel of an elementary classroom, man, you get a middle school teacher in and show them that's not something they entertain easily.
I love it. And especially me being, I don't know, maybe I'm a converted middle school person because I was elementary for 8 years and then the rest has been middle school. The lack of, dare I say this word, innovation when it comes to middle school and high school timetabling and schedules and MTSS and groupings is wacky to me. It's just the idea that after they've hit fifth grade, that we can't give any kid anything but the standard diet of whatever inquiry stuff and and activities, and that we can't limit the amount of transitions they have or the number of teachers they have or certain cohorts they can be in, that it has to be this way of six classes without any intervention even possible, is And nothing can be sacrificed. Never can we have some kid not have PE or whatever it is, right? That could be a possibility for them to get a little dosage of reading. It just doesn't make any sense to me, and I will. It gets me so upset.
It's
Um,
frustrating. I also think that there's a lack. Teachers who go into elementary get something around teaching basic skills. Teachers who know that they're on a track where they're going to teach content theoretically do not attend maybe to some of that stuff. And so some of the foundational knowledge around, yes, this kid reads 125 words a minute, but not multisyllabic words. So when he's in science and the word is deciduous, the entire intent of that paragraph is lost on that child because he can't decode that multisyllabic word. And that critical piece of you're done learning to decode in third grade is not it cannot be an option anymore.
we can see it with we keep talking about motivation and behavior, but we don't know if their refusal to comply and to behave in the classroom is a won't do or a can't do. And
Mhm.
often enough, teachers are pretty sure by implicitly blaming the student, it's on their motivation. They're not motivated, and it's just simply a skill deficit. That if we address it and we give them a chance to be with other students learning the same thing in a step-by-step fashion, all of a sudden this motivation piece just comes to life and and surfaces. I hope people listen to this because honestly, that's something that I think a lot of general education teachers in secondary spaces just need to understand. It's so important. We did mention paras, and I think this is an important component. My mom being a preschool teacher in special education or deaf education for many years, right? Dealing with a rotating kind of influx of new paras who are just right out of high school sometimes, and then they move on, maybe become teachers, right? It's a challenging thing. Do you think it's possible with a great program like DI, to train a para in a relatively short amount of time to teach skillfully and to help students at all levels? I'm very curious about this because I think it has not been asked on this podcast. Maybe Anne, maybe you can tackle this.
Okay, so I think that there's such a range of abilities and levels of motivation. I think that the paras are the under respected resource, and it's such a shame. It's just leaving money on the table because well-trained, motivated paras it's like getting away with murder. It's like, you're getting a whole extra teacher in there. It's motivating for the children. It's motivating for the teacher. You can maximize your efficiency. Not all paras are cut out for this. One of my challenges was that I wasn't their, say, supervisor, so to speak. So I wasn't, quite their boss. So it was kind of a luck thing. But the ones that were good were very, very good. So many teachers will say the same thing. Some are not so good. Some were really intimidated by the scripts and just a different way of doing things, or just a way of doing things where, yes, somebody was going to be watching you. One seasoned para remember saying, we need more autonomy. No, you don't. It's my classroom. Your name's not on the IEP, and but it's important to be really encouraging and positive and have time to model. And when you do that, there's a cost to that because then some kid's not going to get their DI that day, but it's an investment that you can make. So much could be improved by just admin buying into what you're doing. And so for many years, I had a principal who was incredibly supportive. And those were my sort of golden years in my career. And I'll never forget that principal. She made it work. I wouldn't have been able to do that without her. So
I'm thinking of a story that sort of says the flip side of this, which is that I one time went into a special education classroom resource room, and the teacher was sitting on the computer and not really, doing stuff. And there was one para, and I said, so look at your connecting math concepts. I'm gonna order what you need. I've looked through it all. It looks like you're set to go. And she goes, yeah, we were trained to do that 5 years ago. Are we still doing that? I would love to jump right back on that. I loved that structure. I loved how it did. I loved the success they got, and it was just sort of like she had to take the leadership of the teacher, and the teacher themselves wasn't buying into this, right? Wasn't trained and wasn't invested in it. Yeah, Randy, I'd love to hear what your thoughts on this before I go to the next question.
I think that it is possible to do kind of a more limited training with teachers, only with the huge caveat that there needs to be follow-up coaching. Because I consult, and I consult in a lot of different areas, not just DI. One of the flags I'm carrying right now is teachers taking that leadership role. No, we are not a para's boss. But as Ann already said, at the end of the day, it's your name on that IEP. It's your name when it goes to fair hearing. It's all of that is on you. So I think one of the things is that we need to be a little more willing to empower teachers to make corrections and to give them a little background in, and maybe if it's even just a carrier phrase to use when you're coaching a para, just some, there's no way that they would know how to coach. It's a skill that you have to acquire. So I think helping teachers who are seasoned in the program to then be positive and coach with their assistants in the classroom is really important. I also think that in many of my clients, and not all of them by any stretch, the para and the teacher switches instructional groups every 2 weeks. So while you're gathering those data from while the para is teaching, and the para is keeping pretty intensive data, the same data that the teacher keeps, I think getting in there on the ground, and you know this from coaching, you kind of want to just go, let me just see what this feels like with these kids. And that kind of taking over and teaching those groups at least once or twice a month is really important. It also sends a message to the para. Number one, I'm watching, and I don't mean that in a mean way. And number two, we're all taking responsibilities for these kids. I am not just handing you these kids and never asking about them again.
Could I insert a less interesting but more practical or a practical comment about curriculum design of just about all the programs we're talking about, maybe all of them, that lends itself to working with pairs. Sometimes the child is absent. Sometimes the child gets pulled for speech testing or goes home early or whatever. And sometimes we are out and we need to write sub-plans. The structure and organization of all of these programs lend themselves really well for that. Writing sub-plans post Common Core Standards era is enough to make you sick for an extra day because it's so much work and then nobody reads the plan. But the stability and the momentum of the program are preserved with that kind of organization. Even if Bob misses like one part, then you can just go, oh, could you quickly teach Bob part 7 on lesson 64? And then he's caught up again. So it's that kind of logistical benefit is great. And that's provided by the organization. I just wanted to mention that.
I love that. And I think another thing that keeps coming up is IEPs. And I've never personally had my name, like you've just said, on an IEP, but I've been involved in a lot of these meetings. I sometimes wonder if people who really, really believe in the system without knowing much about it don't realize that you can have an IEP meeting that leads to an IEP that just makes no sense, right? The stuff in it cannot be actionable. I mean, I've seen learning styles inside of IEPs. I've seen really not ambitious targets and goals for kids that have lasted for years and years. So how might DI actually help to fix some of these issues, or at least perhaps guide the process of using data better so that these goals and these IEPs are actually actionable and useful for teachers? Maybe Randy, we'll go with you.
So as I mentioned before, I'm a big fluency fan. So math facts fluency, decoding fluency, spelling fluency, handwriting fluency, letter formation. I think it's a very solid, measurable skill. I think if we just back up to and look at decoding for a minute, when you're talking about a corrective reader, and I will, every single day, those kids are doing a timed reading, a fluency checkout. Every single day, you know where you stand with every single one of your students. If you needed to update an IEP that day, that would take 3 minutes. He was reading 20 words a minute. On this date, he is now reading 45 words a minute. We even taught teachers to do aim lines to see if they were making adequate progress towards the goal. It just this little microcosm of the DI community within a school that is not doing a school-wide implementation. Some of that discussion around data and things that you would use for IEPs leaks over into the rest of the school, where we're now looking at talking about solid data. Why did I move this kid to this group? Here are my data. I would spend hours updating IEPs until I understood aim lines and I understood the impact of fluency. I could definitely talk about comprehension when I had a kid who was reading 40 words a minute. I could make a case for why why this is the least restrictive environment for this student. Reading Shakespeare would be interesting, but it's very restrictive if you can't decode. It was very solid to have that.
I just want to interject 1 second. If a parent catches you in the hallway or at an IEP or what, on a dime, you can say, Fred read 70 words per minute, 64% accuracy. Here's my notebook. And then they stop asking you because they trust you. Sorry, but that data is just so powerful on a micro or macro level.
Agree. And I mean, it's as powerful to the kids. How many times have you walked into a corrective reading classroom? I often don't know the kids because I'm in and out. And a child comes up to you with their words per minute graph and goes, I used to do this and now I do that. That's huge. We talk about, I mean, the hip now and wow kids, teachers talk about that all the time. Kids knowing where they stand. Well, show me how you know. I know every day. It also speaks to the exhaustion at the end of a DI lesson. If you're not exhausted and you don't know how many times Chad breathed during that lesson, you did not teach that lesson. It's exhausting. So the fact that you used a script doesn't make a lick of difference. If you're not tired, you're not done.
Let me interject again, though. It's a good kind of tired.
Absolutely.
End of the day, you know what they know. You don't have some vague idea. I wonder if they think they're mathematicians today or not, or whatever, and that's a terrible place to be, to spend hours and hours and hours on curricula with a pedagogy that is unproven. And then what did I just do that for? I didn't spend time with my child that day again. To do what again? It is a good kind of tired, and it's so motivating for everyone involved.
You might know this better than me. Maybe I'm romanticizing something, but you've touched on something. You've hit a nerve with me. This idea that the old school teacher who understood I've got to teach like my pants are on fire is gone in education. Maybe it's a post-COVID thing. Maybe it's a millennial Gen, whatever it is thing, where the feeling of going to work and teaching with your heart and your best smile and to pretend like you love this stuff, even though you'd rather be taking a bubble bath. Where did it go? And maybe that's just me getting older and feeling jaded or something. Randy, you work with lots of schools. And do you get a sense that the role of the teacher and how much you need to put into this, and you do have to take some stuff home, is that disappearing? I'm literally curious about this.
100%. And I don't mean to bash anyone. I recently had an experience where I was called into an urban school, and urban schools are what I do. And I was hearing, they wanted me to work with a specific teacher. And I kept hearing these things that sounded like there needed to be more like surgery on this teacher than me coming in to coach. And it was just one egregious act and oversight after another. And in my despair, I turned to this group of leaders and said, I'm not trying to be cheeky at all, but is there a reason that this teacher was invited back this year? And the answer was, you got someone to hire? And so, yes, the pool is shallow. Things have changed just in terms of what we look like as a society who teaches. And I also think that this is a bigger issue in that that subgroup of teachers, and I mean, hope it's just a subgroup, also spends a lot of time blaming social issues and blaming students. So I talk a lot about, parents working 3 jobs. I talk and not sitting around the table and doing, vocabulary enhancement at night with their kids. I also think that we need to look at, I say to teachers all the time in my less than cheeky, after they like me, it's not what I open with, you have an option. You can adopt these kids and work on the social side of things and make sure that Jesus has breakfast every morning, or you can do what's right for the 6 hours that they're in front of you every day. Which one of those is an option for you? Because we're not gonna, I do a lot of social justice stuff outside of school, but when those kids are in front of me, I owe them my best. It doesn't matter if I was trained to be a teacher, if I want this job for 3 months or whatever it is. Those are somebody's children. And I think we need to talk a lot more about that.
Absolutely. It just kind of going back to the project follow through stuff. If you, for some reason, are tuning in right now and you haven't heard about project follow through, you haven't listened to the episode about it and all this, I invite you to rewind, go back, check out the other episodes. But sort of the original ethos around, the war on poverty, around bringing kids up with the tools that education has built into it, right? Which is we can get kids into schools, we can give them a meal at the beginning of the day, but we've got to teach, and we've got to teach well, and we've got to use the best possible methods we have at our disposal. I hope we see a change in people kind of adopting this mindset. If they didn't learn, I didn't teach it, right? I didn't teach it well. What can I adjust? Where can I change to meet these kids' needs? Thank you. You touched on that so beautifully. We should end with another question, which is, I guess, one of those things is if you're listening to this, you're excited, you're enthusiastic. So what surprises sort of come up most when training teachers in a special education context to use DI materials? What are some of the things that we need to think about and do nots? Randy, how about you take it?
So one of the things I think that's lacking are some very foundational pieces for teachers. I didn't learn about fluency and all the information I can glean from a fluency measure. I didn't understand pre-skills. To me, you're in 4th grade. I got to get you to 5th grade material. Let's start at the beginning of 4th grade and really teach my face off. That it doesn't matter. If you don't know your multiplication facts, you can put equivalent fractions up on the board from now until next month, and it's not going to help. That concept of teaching pre-skills. And I think one of the reasons that teachers shy away from that is that we're trying to be efficient and save time. However, we need to make more than 1 year's growth with kids who are more than 1 year behind. And so giving them pre-skills in a really efficient way is something that we can generalize across content, across new levels of the same content. So I think basic understanding of, my best way of saying it is pay now or pay later. We really need to understand that if you are in 2nd grade, I'm not working on your addition math facts. You need your multiplication math facts. We'll come back and you've got some weird thing you're doing to count to figure out addition. I need to give you this specific pre-skill so we can move on. And I know that none of that was ever discussed with me. I had zero concept of that.
I think if I could like illustrate it with just an example, because I know some people have done the teacher child read book that are listening, or they've done a phonics program, right? And the feeling at the beginning of how slow it seems to go. Why are we breaking this down? Say it fast and say it slow. And why do we keep doing this? But all you have to do is turn to the last page of that
Right.
book and look at the final text. And then actually now there's two things that you have to hold in mind. One is that you go slow to go fast and you pay it now or pay it later. And the other thing is look how ambitious and how incredible the performance can be at the end. How does it even come together? It's I show people that last page of it's the Tiger 2 page on the Teach a Child to Read, and they go, wait, my child can read this in 100 lessons, right? Yeah, or maybe a few more, but they'll get here, but with these pre-skills in place, they'll be automatic when they get there. It's something people have to know. And take it away. What are some of the surprises and things that you kind of wanted to share with us?
Well, I don't know. It's a little discouraging. It seems I've met many teachers that didn't know the basics, didn't know what phonics was. People my age didn't know. And I thought people my age knew about phonics. What's a long vowel? Huh? What? The good news about the DI stuff is that you can quickly teach yourself. So whatever gaps there are, fine. But don't go into a classroom if you don't know what a fraction is. You better find out. And my learning curve was much more about how to sell a fraction or how to teach it, but not so much. I knew what a fraction was since for many years, but just like how to break that down. But there's just a lot of, as Randy said, there's a lot of background knowledge, not just with delivering instruction, designing instruction, but just knowledge. So, and I worry that things have gotten worse rather than better since I'm old, but in more recent generations, especially with whole HOLE language and that kind of thing. So there's a lot to live down. But again, these materials are very efficient.
Oh, absolutely. And then the same folks that kind of overestimate their knowledge of the content too think that they can generate examples on the fly. But you know what I mean? See, that's the thing that doesn't make sense to me. Like that we have this order of minimally different, sameness examples that go in just a field tested sort of logical order, building upon it. And it's about a content area you now are first learning yourself. And you think you can freelance? You just spontaneously come up with, I can't come up with non-examples on this podcast while
Right.
we're recording, right? It's so thank you. Thank you for bringing that. I love it. It's time to close out. I'm just thrilled of people that have tuned in to this podcast and they're listening to this episode that they're going to really have felt like they were immersed in this topic. They might be considering different things for their future. Just wanted to plug the Nifty conference, which happens every year in Eugene, Oregon. Plug that. I will be there this year from a year from this recording. I'll be talking about cognitive science as it applies to DI. I want this title to be, it's not going to get approved, like Zig already discovered it or something like that, where the cognitive load principles are in the materials and now you know the why, right? So come check that out. And also follow this podcast, follow me, give it a 5-star, share it around. Randy, Ann, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Zach, I want to just take 1 sec and thank you for adding to my education, which was not much of an education at all. And now I go on hikes in my retirement and listen to your podcast, and I've met so many geniuses that have just enriched my life so much, and that I apply to my tutoring practice. So I'm still teaching, with such enthusiasm and without all of the impediments. And I'm just so grateful to you for providing that. You were like the gateway to that. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for sending my daughter math games. I mean, honestly, she plays them all the time. Thank you for sending her math games. Randy, yeah, do you have any last words before we close out?
I don't. I appreciate everything you're doing. I will be at the Nifty conference. I've been training there for several years. I also want to just put a plug out. Nifty is an implementation company. So if you are looking at implementing in your school and need support, Nifty is there. They're not just there to hire to come in and swoop in and do a full implementation, which we're really good at there, but they're also there just to lean on. And anybody who answers the phone there will get you help. This isn't something you want to go into alone. There's a large population. As much as we wish it was larger, there's a lot of us out here who want to see the best for your kids. So we're happy to help.
Awesome. And with that, listeners, thank you so much for listening. Take care.